Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we are tackling a massive topic. This is something that is fundamentally reshaping the financial landscape across social media, private tutoring, and, well, everywhere else online. We're looking at that absolutely crucial legal boundary between creating genuinely helpful online financial education and accidentally crossing over into heavily regulated investment advice. Look, if you're a financial content creator, a tutor, or a Finfluencer, you've probably got that classic not financial advice disclaimer slapped right across your bio, right? We've all seen it. But the reality is, the line between just sharing your knowledge and suddenly becoming an unregistered financial advisor, well, it's a lot thinner and way more heavily regulated than a simple little disclaimer can actually fix. So let's dive right into this explainer and map out exactly where the SEC draws that line in the sand.
Here's our agenda for today. First, education versus investment advice. Second, the SEC's three-pronged test. Third, crossing the regulatory line. Fourth, the Fiduciary Duty Standard. And finally, number 5, the Form ADV framework.
All right, let's jump into Section 1, Education versus Investment Advice.
To really understand this boundary, we first have to establish a solid baseline for what true, purely safe financial education actually looks like. Take a concept like Jensen's Alpha. This is a definition straight from the CFA Institute. It's derived from the capital asset pricing model, and it basically measures the excess return a portfolio generates over its expected return. It essentially quantifies a manager's specific skill, completely isolating it from broader market movements. Now, teaching this concept to your audience, explaining the complex math, discussing market risk versus idiosyncratic risk, that is entirely academic. You are simply equipping your viewers with the tools to understand finance. You are absolutely not telling them what to do with their own money.
But here's where it gets tricky. The real tension for modern content creators lies right at the point of application. So explaining a concept like beta and how it measures how sensitive an asset is to market movements, that is perfectly safe, totally fine education. But the second you recommend that a client or a viewer actually go out and buy a specific high beta mutual fund, wow, okay, that is a totally different ballgame. That is actionable, specific investment advice. The very moment you shift from explaining how a financial tool works to telling someone to actually use it on a specific asset, you are walking right up to and probably stepping over that regulatory boundary.
Moving on to Section 2, the SEC's three-pronged test.
Okay, so the absolute foundation of this entire legal framework is SEC Release IA 1092. This is the document that clarifies exactly who falls under the Investment Advisors Act of 1940. Specifically, Section 202A11 legally defines what an investment advisor actually is. And guys, the gravity of this statutory text literally cannot be overstated. Let's be real, the SEC does not have a sense of humor about this. They frankly do not care if your Instagram or TikTok bio says "not financial advice" next to a little siren emoji. They really don't. They only care if your activities actually meet the strict statutory definition outlined in federal law.
So we can actually distill all that dense legalese down into a relatively simple three-pronged test that regulators use. Prong 1, do you provide advice or issue reports or analyses regarding securities? Prong 2, are you in the business of providing these services? And prong 3, do you provide these services for compensation? That's the test. If you hit all 3 of those prongs, you are legally acting as an investment advisor. And it completely doesn't matter if you prefer to call yourself a Finfluencer, a private tutor, a life coach, or a consultant.
Now, when we zoom in on what specifically constitutes advice for that first prong, the SEC staff is incredibly explicit. Specific investment advice includes recommending specific categories of securities. They actually cite clear examples in their guidance, like recommending medical technology stocks or specific types of mutual funds. So it's not just about explicitly saying, hey guys, go buy Apple stock right now. If you recommend that a viewer allocate, say, a certain percentage of their assets to high-yielding bonds or growth stock funds, under the law, you are providing specific investment advice.
That brings us to Section 3, Crossing the Regulatory Line.
Now, the absolute biggest trap for many creators is actually that third prong we talked about, compensation. A lot of people think, well, I don't charge my followers a fee for my stock picks, so I'm totally safe. But actually, no. The SEC's definition of compensation is unbelievably broad. Yes, it includes separate direct charges for advice, and it includes transaction-based kickbacks if a viewer implements your advice. But most dangerously for online creators, it includes advice bundled within overall fees. So think about a generic $10 a month subscription to a premium Discord community or a Patreon tier. If any economic benefit at all is tied to the advisory service you're giving, the compensation element is fully satisfied.
And there's this massive misconception out there that you can just smartly separate your online personas to get around this. Creators often think, okay, I'll just give super generic educational content on my public YouTube channel, but then I'll give specific securities advice as an insurance agent or a broker on a different platform. Nope. The SEC explicitly states in Release 1092 that you absolutely cannot do indirectly what is illegal to do directly. So if your overall business model provides generic advice in one capacity, but specific advice in another, the SEC looks at the whole integrated picture. In their eyes, you are still in the business of giving advice.
Which leads perfectly into Section 4, the Fiduciary Duty Standard.
This is crucial. Once you cross that line and officially become an investment advisor, everything changes. You are no longer just an entertainer or a teacher. You instantly become a fiduciary. The anti-fraud provisions of the Advisors Act dictate that you have an absolute, unshakable duty to disclose all material facts to prevent fraud or deceit upon any client or even a prospective client. You can no longer just hide behind a screen name or a casual little disclaimer in your video description. If there's a conflict of interest, like say you personally own a ton of the tiny microcap stock you are hyping up on your live stream, failing to explicitly disclose that isn't just considered bad form. It's literally considered fraud under federal law.
And the severity of this fiduciary duty? It isn't just some vague SEC staff guidance. It goes all the way up to the very top. In the landmark case, SEC v. Capital Gains Research Bureau, the United States Supreme Court ruled that an investment advisor owes their clients an affirmative duty of utmost good faith and full and fair disclosure of all material facts. The court specifically noted that darkness and commercial secrecy are the exact conditions under which predatory practices thrive. So as a fiduciary, you literally must operate in the absolute light. No secrets. Finally, let's look at Section 5, the Form 80V framework.
So when you do register as an investment advisor, you are required to file and deliver a formal brochure, which is known as Form ADV Part 2. And regulators have a really specific, interesting rule for this document. It literally must be written in plain English. The SEC intentionally designed this requirement to promote actual, effective communication between you and your clients. You absolutely cannot hide your conflicts of interest behind impenetrable walls of dense legal jargon. You have to use short sentences, everyday words, and active voice, constantly keeping in mind your client's actual, real-world level of financial sophistication.
In practical application, this simply means laying out the whole shebang clearly for the client. You have to disclose your fees and commissions, right? Because clients need to know if you are being financially incentivized to push specific products onto them. You absolutely must disclose any disciplinary history, revealing any past run-ins with regulators or past violations. You even have to disclose things called soft dollar benefits. For instance, if a broker gives you free expensive research tools in exchange for you directing your clients' trades to their platform. Like we said, there are no secrets here.
The SEC gets incredibly granular when it comes to these conflicts of interest. In your Form ADV, you have to explicitly state if you accept asset-based sales charges from mutual funds. Why? Because that directly pits your wallet against your client's best interest. You have to disclose if you charge performance-based fees, like taking a share of the capital gains, because that setup might actually encourage you to take outsized, dangerous risks with their money. Recommending securities you personally own, getting paid for client referrals, all of this requires highly specific, plain English disclosure so the client can give true, fully informed consent.
All of this brings us to the ultimate question you really have to stop and ask yourself today. Look honestly at the content you create, look at that premium community you run, look at the specific things you say online. Are your educational videos secretly investment advice? Because if you are analyzing securities, providing that analysis regularly, and receiving literally any kind of direct or bundled compensation for it, well, that not financial advice disclaimer is absolutely not going to save you. The SEC's line in the sand might already be firmly behind you. It's a fascinating, albeit super complex regulatory world, and I really hope this explainer has helped you see the structure behind all the rules. Keep learning, keep analyzing carefully, and I will see you in the next one.